The distress signal had been playing for 19 days before we found it. I was not supposed to hear it. Our mission was cartography, mapping dead star systems on the outer edge of explored space, cataloging gas clouds and asteroid belts that nobody would ever use. Quiet work, safe work, the kind of assignment they give a crew that has spent too long in active service and needs a rest without being told they need one. 42 of us on the INS Unbroken, a retrofit frigate that had survived 3 wars and smelled like it. My name is Yara Voss, and I had been a soldier for 14 years, which means I had forgotten what a full night of sleep felt like and had stopped trying to remember. We were 6 weeks into the mission when our long-range receiver caught it. A voice, alien, but translated in real time by our systems. Broken, cycling, the same 3 minutes of audio repeating over and over from a direction that was not on our charts. The translation came through clean enough to understand. A world called Kelevara was asking for help. Not asking. Begging. I sat in the communications bay with Corporal Danny Holt, and we listened to it twice without speaking. The voice on the recording belonged to someone who was clearly not a soldier, clearly not trained for crisis communication, and clearly terrified. They described ships in the sky that did not respond to conclave codes. They described cities going dark one by one. They described things on the ground that hunted without stopping, without negotiating, without any apparent interest in anything except the ending of life. Danny looked at me when the recording cycled back to the beginning for the 3rd time. She was 26 years old, small-framed, and had the kind of eyes that made people underestimate her in every situation, until the situation required her to act. She said, "The signal is 19 days old." I said, "I know." She said, "That means whatever is happening there has been happening for 19 days already." I said, "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do we do?" That was the question. The answer was not complicated, but it had weight to it. We were not authorized for combat operations. We were a cartography crew on a rest assignment. The Kelevaran system was not our territory, not our responsibility, and not even in our sector. The Galactic Conclave, the vast and ancient governing body that managed peace between over 200 species, had its own processes for situations like this. Committees, envoys, diplomatic channels, resolution frameworks that had been refined over 4 centuries of practiced nonviolence. The Conclave had also, 3 years ago, rejected humanity's application for membership. Too volatile, their assessment read, too prone to conflict. We would be reconsidered in another decade, perhaps 2, once we had demonstrated sufficient restraint. I had read that assessment twice. I had disagreed with it both times, but not for the reasons most people assumed. We were not volatile. We were responsive. There was a difference, and it was the kind of difference that mattered enormously in a moment like this one. I stood up. I pulled up the star charts on the bay's secondary screen and found the origin point of the signal. I did the math on travel time in my head. Then I walked to the bridge. Lieutenant Owen Creed was running sensor diagnostics when I came through the door. He was 34, lean and angular, with a habit of tapping his left knee when he was processing something. He looked up at me and read my face in under a second. He stopped tapping his knee. "You found something," he said. "We found something," I said. "Get the crew together." We met in the cargo bay because it was the only space large enough to hold all 42 of us at once. I played the distress signal through the ship's speakers so everyone could hear it. Then I told them what I knew, which was not much. A planet under sustained assault. A conclave member world. An enemy species called the Vorkai, referenced in our alien contact database as a non-member predatory culture with a history of fringe world raiding that had never escalated to anything the conclave felt required a formal response. The signal was 19 days old. We were approximately 31 hours from Kelevara, at maximum burn. I told them we had no orders. I told them we had no authorization. I told them I was not going to pretend this was anything other than exactly what it was. A choice, made by 42 people in a cargo bay, about whether to go somewhere dangerous for no reason, except that something terrible was happening there, and we happened to be the only ones close enough to matter. I told them the vote would be real. Anyone who voted no would face no consequence, no record, nothing. We would continue the cartography mission, and file a report that would reach the conclave in 6 weeks. The vote took 40 seconds. It was unanimous. Nobody cheered. Nobody made a speech. People just started moving, checking equipment, running diagnostics, preparing the ship for a combat approach. Owen laid in the new course without being asked. Danny went back to communications and started building a detailed profile of everything our database had on the Vorkai. I stood at the front of the cargo bay for a moment, after everyone had cleared out, looking at the empty space where 42 people had just made a decision that would change things for all of us, one way or another. I had spent 14 years being a soldier. I had spent most of that time being told what to do, where to go, when to act. This was different. This was a choice that belonged entirely to us, made because we looked at a signal from a dying world and decided that the reason nobody was coming was simply that nobody who was close enough had decided to come yet. We were close enough. We had decided. I went to the weapons locker and began the inventory. 31 hours. It was not a long time to prepare for something like this, but soldiers do not need long times. We need clear objectives and functioning equipment, and people who trust each other. We had all three. The Unbroken burned hard through the dark between stars, and none of us slept much, and none of us talked about what we might find when we got there. We had all seen enough to know that imagining it in advance did not help. Better to stay focused on the work. Better to sharpen the tools and check the systems and let the reality come when it came. It came at hour 30, when we dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and the visual feeds came live on the bridge screens, and everyone who was on the bridge at that moment went quiet, in a way that was not the ordinary quiet of people waiting for information. It was the quiet of people seeing something they would not forget. Kelevara hung in the center of the screens, green and blue and wreathed in cloud, the kind of world that looked peaceful from a distance. But the distance was closing, and what surrounded it was not peaceful. What surrounded it was the evidence of 19 days of systematic destruction, debris fields where orbital platforms had been, the scorched signatures of weapons that did not bother with precision, 3 enormous ships sitting in low orbit like they owned the planet and everything on it, because at that moment, they did. Owen said very quietly, "There are people still alive down there. I'm reading heat signatures, concentrated, underground, scattered across 4 or 5 locations." I looked at the 3 ships. I looked at our 1 ship. I did the math that every soldier eventually has to do, the math that tells you whether the problem in front of you is possible or impossible, and what the difference between those 2 things actually costs. "Owen," I said. "Yes, Sergeant." "Take us into the debris field. I want to get closer before they see us." He took us in without another word, threading the Unbroken through the remnants of platforms that had been someone's first line of defense, once. I went back to brief the crew on what we were walking into. Nobody flinched. That was the thing about soldiers that people who had never been soldiers did not always understand. The flinching happens before, in the long, quiet hours of anticipation. When the reality arrives, something else takes over, something focused and clear and entirely practical. We had work to do. The 3 Vorkai cruisers had not seen us yet. That would not last, but for now, in the shadow of a debris field above a dying world, we had something more valuable than size or numbers or authorization. We had the element of surprise. I had built entire operations on less. The shuttle hit atmosphere at a steep angle, and I watched the heat tiles on the outer hull glow amber through the porthole before I looked away and focused on the 14 soldiers crammed into the cabin with me. We were going in under the Vorkai's bombardment window, the gap between their strikes that our sensors had clocked at 22 minutes, long enough to insert if the timing was exact, not long enough to be casual about anything. Danny was running the comm relay from the Unbroken. Owen had the bridge. The rest of the crew was split between ship defense and the 2 other shuttles that would follow us down in sequence, each carrying a different load: medical, engineering, weapons cache. The shuttle shook through the upper cloud layer and came out beneath it into air that was the color of a bruise, thick with smoke and particulate from fires that had been burning for weeks. I could see the ground below. I had seen photographs of Kelevara in our database. A civilized world, urban, populated, the kind of place that had libraries and concert halls and transit systems, and all the ordinary texture of a society that had been building itself for a long time. What I saw from the shuttle window was none of that. What I saw was the result of 3 weeks of systematic work by something that had no interest in any of it. I turned away from the window. The soldiers with me were checking their equipment again, which is what soldiers do when they have done everything they can do, and still have 90 seconds before landing. It is not nervousness. It is the hands needing a job while the mind holds still. We landed hard in the sub-basement of what had been a municipal water treatment facility, now roofless and dark. Its upper floors collapsed into a kind of rubble umbrella that actually made it excellent cover. The local resistance cell had been using it for 11 days. I knew this from the fragments of communication we had managed to decode from surface transmitters during our approach. What I did not know was what we were going to find when the shuttle ramp came down. What we found was 211 Kelevarans standing in the dark. They were tall, taller than humans by about 40 centimeters on average, with elongated limbs and a secondary pair of eyes positioned at the temples that gave them a wider field of vision than ours. Their skin ranged from deep gray to pale silver. In the photographs from our database, they had looked composed, elegant even. The ones standing in front of me looked like people who had not slept in 3 weeks, which is what they were. They stared at us. We stared at them. A figure stepped forward from the group. He was older, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body was exhausted, but whose mind was still running. He wore clothes that had once been professional, the kind of thing a person wears to an office, and they were filthy now, torn at the shoulder, but he stood straight in them. His name, I would learn shortly, was Risal. He had been a municipal administrator before the ships came. He had never, by his own later admission, done anything more physically demanding than a long walk in the hills outside his city. He stopped in front of me. He looked at me. He looked at the soldiers behind me. He looked at the shuttle. He said, through our translation system, "You are human." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "We sent our signal to the conclave. We did not send it to humans." "We know," I said. "We heard it anyway. The conclave has not responded." "I know that too." He looked at me with an expression that I could not fully read. The translator handled language, not faces, and Kelavaran faces had a different architecture than human ones. But something in his posture told me he was trying to understand the situation and finding it difficult, not because the facts were complicated, but because the facts did not match any framework he had been given. "Why would you come?" he said. "You are not conclave members. This is not your sanctioned territory. There is no treaty that requires this of you." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the right way to say it, and decided the honest way was the right way. "Someone was in trouble," I said. "We had a ship. We were close enough." He stared at me. Several of the Kelevarans behind him exchanged what I interpreted as looks of confusion, or disbelief, or both. Risal opened his mouth, closed it, and then seemed to make a decision to set aside whatever he was processing and move on to what was practical. "We are 211, he said. "We have 12 working communication units, some small arms we recovered from a guard station, and food for perhaps 8 more days. We have a partial map of the enemy positions based on what our scouts have observed." "Show me the map," I said. He showed me the map. The Vorkai ground forces numbered somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000. The precision of the count was impossible from what the Kelavaran scouts had been able to observe, moving carefully in groups of 2 through the ruined city. The Vorkai were large. The database had prepared me for that intellectually, but seeing the scale markers on the movement reports made it different. 7 meters of silicon carbide exterior plating, 4 arms, a physiology that treated heat and pressure as minor inconveniences. They moved in units of 40 to 80, systematically sweeping districts, and they were not in a hurry. They had no reason to be in a hurry. Nobody was fighting back. That was about to change, but I kept that part calm inside myself while I looked at the map. My second in command, Sergeant First Class Aaron Briggs, crouched next to me and studied the same map with his chin resting on one hand. Aaron had 17 years of service and had the peculiar quality of becoming more relaxed as situations became more difficult, as if stress operated in reverse for him. He was the only person I had ever met who actually fell asleep more easily on the night before an operation than on a normal night. 4,000, he said. Not as a problem, but as a variable. Approximately, I said. And we have 42. 42 experienced combat soldiers, 1 frigate in orbit, the element of surprise, and 3 weeks of the enemy being completely uncontested in this environment. I looked at him. What do you see on that map? He looked at it for another 10 seconds. Then the corner of his mouth moved, which was Aaron's version of a smile. Infrastructure, he said. That's what I see too. What the Vorkai did not know, could not know, because they had never encountered a species that had fought the kind of wars humans had fought across the previous 4 centuries, was that a ruined city is not an empty city. A ruined city is full of things. Pressurized pipe systems, some still partially functional, structural weaknesses in specific load-bearing points, electrical conduits that no longer carried power, but still carried the physical potential of redirection, sub-basement networks that connected buildings the Vorkai's surface-level sweeps would not account for. The Vorkai had spent 3 weeks treating this place as a location to be cleared. We intended to treat it as a weapon to be used. I called Owen on the Unbroken, and we spent 40 minutes going over the orbital sensor data together, building a picture of the Vorkai patrol patterns. They were consistent. That was useful. Consistent patterns meant predictable positions at predictable times, and predictable positions meant we could work around them, or into them, depending on what a specific moment required. Resol observed this planning process in silence for a while. Then he said, "You are planning to fight them?" "Yes," I said. "There are 3,000 to 5,000 of them." "Yes. And 42 of you." 42 of us and 211 of you, I said, "if you're willing." He was quiet for a long time, not the quiet of reluctance, the quiet of someone recalibrating everything they had assumed about the situation. "We have no training," he said finally. "We are not soldiers. Most of us are administrators, service workers, a few teachers, some engineers." "Engineers are useful," Aaron said from behind me, and he was not joking. Resol looked at Aaron, then at me. "What do you need us to do?" I told him. It took about 20 minutes to lay out the basic structure of what I had in mind, the 3 phases, the timing requirements, the communications protocols, the fallback positions. He listened without interrupting once, which told me something about him. People who are frightened and feeling helpless either talk too much or shut down completely. Resol did neither. He listened the way someone listens when they have decided that the information in front of them is more important than anything happening inside them. When I finished, he said, "The engineers, there are 11 of them. They know the city infrastructure well, the water system, the power conduit network. They designed sections of it. Then they're going to be very important people in the next 4 days," I said. He nodded. He straightened. He said, "I will speak to them." The first night we did not attack anything. We mapped. Resol's engineers led small teams through the subsurface conduit network, recording every access point, every structural condition, every junction and valve and pressure node. My soldiers moved with them, not to protect. The engineers knew this environment and we did not, but to evaluate everything through the lens of what we needed it to do. Corporal Lena Marsh, who had an engineering background from before she joined the military, spent 6 hours in the water system with 2 Kelavaran engineers and came back with a hand-drawn schematic that covered both sides of 4 large sheets of material she had pulled from a collapsed office wall. She spread it on the floor of the facility's lower level and looked up at me with the same expression Aaron had shown over the map. "We can move water pressure through 6 blocks of the Eastern District without anyone on the surface knowing it's happening," she said. "And there are 3 points in that district where the Vorkai have set up staging positions directly over the main conduit junctions." I looked at the schematic. I thought about what a sudden, significant pressure event at those junctions would do to the surface structures directly above them, structures that had already been partially weakened by 3 weeks of bombardment. "How long to set it up?" I said. 8 hours, she said. "Maybe 10. "Set it up," I said. On the second morning, a Vorkai patrol of 60 entered the Eastern District and did not come back. The ones who survived the pressure event and the structural collapse retreated in a direction that took them directly across the killing ground that Aaron's fire team had prepared the previous night. I will not describe the specifics of what happened in that corridor. What matters is that 60 became 4, and the 4 went back to report to their commanders. And for the first time in this entire campaign, something changed in the Vorkai's approach. They slowed down. A predator that has never been contested does not know how to process contest. The Vorkai had been operating on the assumption that the remaining population of this world was hiding and shrinking and waiting to be found. The loss of 60 soldiers to what appeared to be environmental collapse was strange, but not necessarily alarming. Infrastructure failed, especially infrastructure that had been under bombardment. They sent another patrol to investigate the Eastern District. I let that one through. I let them reach the center of the district and look around and find nothing. Then I called Owen. "Target set Gamma," I said. From orbit, the Unbroken's directed energy array sent 3 precise strikes into the district, not targeting the Vorkai directly, but targeting 3 specific structural points that Lena's schematic had identified. The results were not explosive, not dramatic. They were quiet, precise, and devastating in a way that looked, from ground level, exactly like random secondary collapse from existing damage. The 2nd Vorkai patrol lost 31 soldiers to falling structures in an area that showed no sign of any attacker. They pulled back. Their communication frequencies, which Danny had been monitoring from the moment we landed, showed a marked increase in traffic. Something was being discussed at a command level. Resol found me that evening in a side chamber where I was going over the next day's plan. He sat across from me without being invited, which I had noticed he had started doing, the formal distance of their first meeting giving way to something more direct. "My people are talking about what happened today," he said. "What are they saying?" "Some of them are afraid it will make the Vorkai more aggressive. That retaliation will come." He paused. "Others are saying something else." "What are the others saying?" He looked at me for a moment. "They are saying that the sound we heard today, when the 2nd patrol pulled back, was something none of us has heard since this began. They are saying it was the sound of the enemy not knowing what to do." I nodded. "That's correct. That's what that was." "How did you know this would work?" I thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was complicated. It was 14 years of training and experience, and hard lessons and a deep institutional knowledge of how to make a small force generate effects that did not match its size. But that was not the part Resol was really asking about. He was asking about something underneath the tactics. "We have been fighting each other for a very long time," I said. "Humans. We spent most of our history in conflict with ourselves. It produced a lot of suffering. And it also produced a very specific kind of knowledge. The knowledge of how to fight when you are the smaller force, the less equipped force, the force that was not supposed to win." Resol was quiet. "The Vorkai are larger than us and there are far more of them," I continued. "But they have always fought populations that did not know how to fight back. They have never had to develop the art of being contested. We have spent centuries developing nothing else." He thought about that. Then he said, "The Conclave has been trying to manage the Vorkai with diplomacy for 40 years. "I know," I said. "It has not worked. I know that too. But your way—" He stopped. Started again. "Your way requires people to be harmed, requires loss." "Yes," I said. I did not try to soften it. "It does." He looked at his hands. 3 of the 12 people I sent out as scouts in the first week did not come back. "I'm sorry." They were not soldiers. They were— one was a water system engineer. One was a teacher. One ran the records office at the district hall. He looked up. "I have been thinking about them constantly, whether I made the right choice sending them." I looked at him. He was carrying something that I recognized, because I had carried versions of it for 14 years. The weight of having made decisions that other people paid the cost of. "You made the only choice that kept the rest of 200 alive," I said. "That does not make it light. It just makes it the choice you had to make." He nodded slowly. He did not look comforted, because there is no comfort in that kind of truth, only clarity. But clarity was more useful than comfort right now, and he seemed to understand that. "What happens tomorrow?" he said. I showed him the plan. Tomorrow was going to be significantly louder than today. The 3rd day began before dawn, which at that latitude meant a long gray pre-light that turned the ruined skyline into a series of dark shapes against a slightly less dark sky. I had not slept. I had done the mental accounting that soldiers do before a large action, going through every element of the plan, finding the places where things could fail, building contingencies, then accepting that no plan survives contact intact, and that adaptation was always going to be part of it. Aaron found me on the upper level of the facility, where a collapsed section of roof had left an open gap that faced east. He handed me a container of something warm. The Kelevarans had a beverage that translated roughly as morning grain steeped in hot water, and it tasted approximately the way that description suggested, but it was warm, and it existed, so I drank it. "Teams are in position," he said. "All of them?" "Confirmed from 6 of the 7. 7th team is in the subsurface, and running on signal delay, but Lena says they are where they are supposed to be. 7 teams of 6 soldiers each, placed across a 4-block radius over the previous 6 hours. The Kelevaran engineers, working in 2-person units, had spent the night finishing the modifications to the pressure system that would make the central part of today's operation function. Raisal had spent the night organizing his people, the civilians, the non-combatants, into a different kind of role. Not fighting, moving, carrying, watching from positions that kept them out of the direct action, but put them in places where information could flow. I had spent 10 minutes the previous afternoon teaching Raisal to use a standard-issue sidearm. He had been, by any objective measure, remarkably poor at it. His hands were not sized for the grip. His secondary temple eyes interfered with his ability to align the sights the way I showed him, and he flinched, a very honest, very reasonable flinch, at the first practice shot. He fired every practice round I gave him. He hit the target twice out of 14 tries. He handed the weapon back to me and said, "That will not be my strongest contribution." "No," I agreed. "But you've fired one now. You know what it does. You know you can use it if you have to." He had kept the weapon. At exactly the moment the Vorkai's largest patrol group, 83 soldiers, their biggest single concentration, entered the western corridor to continue their sweep of the 4th District, 3 things happened simultaneously. Lena's team activated the pressure modification in the subsurface system. The effect was not visible until the moment the main junction point under the corridor's center section reached critical internal pressure, at which point the surface above it buckled upward with enough force to separate the Vorkai patrol into 2 groups, rear and forward, with a gap of impassable terrain between them. Aaron's team, from 2 elevated positions on opposite sides of the corridor, directed a sustained rate of fire into the forward group, with maximum noise, and a rate that was designed to create the impression of a much larger force. The goal was not to end the engagement quickly. The goal was to hold the forward group in place, and confused for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough time for the second element to matter. I was with the second element, 6 soldiers, moving fast through a subsurface route that came up inside a collapsed building on the north side of the corridor. We came up behind the rear group. The Vorkai rear section was oriented forward, toward the sound of Aaron's engagement, which meant they were looking exactly the wrong direction. What happened in the next 4 minutes I will describe accurately but without unnecessary detail, because the point of it was not the chaos but the outcome. The Vorkai patrol ceased to exist as a functioning unit. 61 of 83 in that one engagement. The remaining 22 scattered into the district, and 4 of those ran directly into positions that 2 of my other teams were holding. The other 18 made it back to the Vorkai staging area to the south. I knew they had made it back because the communications traffic that Danny was monitoring from her position on the Unbroken exploded in volume. She patched me a translation summary 30 minutes later. "They are arguing," she said. "Senior Command is demanding an explanation. The patrol leader who made it back is trying to explain the pattern of the attack. Senior Command is saying his explanation is not possible." "Why not possible?" "Because his description does not match any known form of engagement. He is saying the attack came from underground, from above, and from behind, simultaneously, coordinated to a degree that he cannot reconcile with the size of force that the physical evidence suggests was involved." A brief pause. The senior commander's response, and I am translating this as accurately as I can, is essentially, "This does not make sense." I thought about that. "Good," I said. "Things that don't make sense are harder to prepare for than things that do." On the 4th morning, Raisal told me that the mood in the facility had changed. I had noticed it too. Something in the posture of the Kelevaran civilians, the way they moved through the space, a fractional but real shift from the dense, contained stillness of people who had been enduring to something slightly more forward-leaning. Not confidence, not yet, but orientation. The difference between people who are waiting for something to be done to them and people who are, even marginally, in motion. He had been working with them, organizing their skills not just for supply movement and information relay, but for something more specific. The engineers had identified 2 more pressure junction points in the northern district that could be operated remotely if certain manual valves were opened from the subsurface access tunnels. He wanted to know if civilians could be trained to do that job. It is not difficult physically, he said. It requires someone who can move quietly, follow a precise route, and perform a single mechanical action at a specific time. I looked at him. He was not asking permission. He was informing me of what he had decided and checking whether I saw a problem with it. Can they do it without being seen? I said. 3 of the people I have in mind have been moving through those tunnels for 2 weeks, he said. They know every junction. They are smaller than my average, easier to move quietly. I thought about it for 3 seconds, briefed them on the timing exactly. They need to be 30 meters clear of the junction before activation, minimum. Understood. He went to brief them. They did it. They did it precisely, at the correct time, without incident. And the effect in the northern district 14 hours later removed another 44 Vorkai from the campaign and sent the survivors back toward the southern staging area at a pace that could not be described as organized withdrawal. It could be described as panic. The word came through in the afternoon communications intercept. The Vorkai had put a name on us. Not humans. They did not know we were human. They had no framework for what was happening in this city. The name they were using, Danny told me with a strange expression in her voice, translated approximately as, the ones in the ground. Not because they thought we lived underground, but because the attacks seemed to emerge from below, from inside the city itself, as if the city had developed a response to them, as if the infrastructure of a dead civilization had decided it was not finished yet. I did not find that description inaccurate. Private Cole Whitman was the first of mine that we lost. He was 23 and had been in service for 2 years. He was in a secondary team position in the Eastern District when a Vorkai patrol changed its route unexpectedly, the increasing caution in their movements making them less predictable, not more, which was a danger I had factored in but not perfectly solved for. The contact was brief and uneven. Cole and 2 others were caught at an intersection. The other 2 made it back. Cole did not. I had known him for 14 months. He had a habit of humming to himself when he was working on equipment maintenance. I had told him to stop 3 times and he had each time looked genuinely surprised, as if he had not known he was doing it. I recorded his name and the time. I told Aaron. Aaron nodded once and did not speak. Then we went back to the work, because that is what you do. Not because the loss doesn't weigh on you, but because the weight and the work exist at the same time, and the work does not stop for the weight. Cole understood that. It is what being a soldier means. We lost 2 more in the next 48 hours. Private Nadia Fossey and Corporal Glenn Harker. Nadia on the 3rd day, Glenn on the 4th. Both in contacts that were the result of the Vorkai's increasing caution, changing their patrol geometry in ways that partially disrupted our pre-planned positions. I said their names to myself at night. I kept a separate part of my mind where those names stayed while the rest of me was occupied with the next decision. By the morning of the 5th day, 39 of us now, active and functioning, something had shifted in the city. The Vorkai patrol activity had dropped by more than 60% from its level before our first engagement. The remaining forces were consolidating at the southern staging area. The 3 orbital cruisers were still in position, but their bombardment activity had stopped. Danny's communications intercepts were now dominated by a single thread, a conversation between the Vorkai ground commander and what appeared to be higher authority aboard the cruisers. The ground commander's name, as best as we could render it in translation, was Gorshok. His description of events over the previous 5 days was, according to Danny's summary, increasingly difficult for his superiors to accept. He was reporting that an unknown force, of unknown size, operating through the destroyed infrastructure of the city, had caused the elimination of more than 600 of his soldiers. His superiors were suggesting that his numbers were wrong. He was insisting they were not. At 10 hours into the 5th day, a message came through on a general broadcast frequency, addressed to whoever was operating in the city. In translation, "This is Commander Gorshok. I request communication with the commanding force currently engaged in Kelevara." I looked at Danny's relay for a long moment. Then I opened the channel. "This is Sergeant Yara Voss," I said. "Go ahead." A pause, longer than the communication delay warranted. "I am attempting to identify which conclave military authority you represent," Gorshok said. "I don't represent a conclave military authority," I said. "I represent 42 humans from Earth and 1 frigate in orbit." The pause this time was very long. "Earth," he said. "The nascent species." "Yes." "No conclave sanction." "No." "You came here independently." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Resol's question on the first night, and the answer I had given him, and whether a different answer might land differently with this particular listener. "Because you were here," I said, "and someone needed to not let you be here anymore." Another long silence. "You have lost soldiers," he said. "Yes." "You knew you would lose soldiers before you came." "Yes." "And you came anyway." "Yes." The channel stayed open for another 11 seconds. Then Gorshok said, "I do not understand your species." "I know," I said. "That's been working out well for us. Keep running." I closed the channel. Aaron was behind me. He had heard the whole thing. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "That last part was probably not strictly necessary." "No," I said, "but it was honest." He made the sound that was Aaron's version of a laugh. I called Owen on the unbroken. Owen had been waiting for this call since the previous day, which meant he had been running and refining the targeting solution for approximately 30 hours. Owen was the kind of officer who treated preparation as a form of care. The more thoroughly he prepared, the more seriously he took the people who depended on the outcome. He had 3 target packages ready, labeled by priority, and he walked me through them in under 4 minutes, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done his work and trusts it. The timing was everything. What we were planning required the orbital strike and the ground action to land within seconds of each other, which meant Aaron's teams needed to be in exact position before I gave Owen the signal. We had the positions mapped. We had the routes to those positions confirmed. We had a communications protocol that would give me a rolling status check from each team leader every 3 minutes until we were ready. The gap in the Vorkai's attention was the consolidation at the southern staging area. When forces consolidate after a difficult engagement, there is a window, brief but real, when the thinking is about regrouping rather than what is coming next. Gorshok was regrouping. He had pulled his remaining ground forces south. He was, I suspected, waiting to hear from his command structure what to do about a situation that had not followed any script they had prepared for. We were not going to give him that time. At 4 hours before dawn on the 6th day, Aaron's 6 teams moved into position across a wide arc surrounding the southern staging area. They moved through the subsurface routes, through rubble-covered streets, through collapsed buildings, over a period of 90 minutes, without a single communication being made above the lowest possible signal threshold. The Kelevaran engineers who had spent days learning these routes moved with 3 of the teams, guiding them through the final approaches. Resol was with me at the central position, not because I needed him there, but because he had asked to be there, and I had said yes. He had asked to be there not because he wanted to witness something dramatic, but because he felt it was his responsibility, as the person who represented the people in the facility, to be present at the moment that their survival was determined. I respected that. He stood behind me, quiet, holding the sidearm he had been given, and I did not for a moment think he would need to use it, but I was glad he had it. The check-ins came in over 7 minutes. All 6 teams. Confirmed position. Owen confirmed target lock from orbit. Danny confirmed that Vorkai communications were still internal. No indication that our movement had been detected. I looked at my chronometer. I looked at the sky beginning to show the first gray suggestion of another dawn. I pressed the signal. What happened in the next 11 minutes was the most precisely coordinated thing I have ever been part of. And I have been part of many coordinated things. Owen's strikes hit 3 specific points of the Vorkai cruiser's propulsion arrays. Not to destroy them, because a destroyed ship in orbit creates debris that falls on the world below, but to disable them. to take their ability to leave or to reposition out of the equation. The strikes hit within 0.4 seconds of each other. The effect was the simultaneous loss of maneuverability for all three ships, which took their bombardment capacity offline and created, in the space of under a second, a situation where the Vorkai force had no reliable path to orbit and no cover from above. On the ground, Aaron's 6 teams opened engagement simultaneously, from 6 different directions, around the southern staging area. The Vorkai outnumbered us by a ratio that I will not repeat, because the number is not the point. The point is what the number meant from the inside of the situation, which was nowhere to retreat to that was safe, contact from directions that did not correspond to a linear engagement, an enemy operating in a mode that the Vorkai had no cultural or tactical framework for processing. When a predator meets resistance for the first time in its history, one of 2 things happens. It learns, or it runs. Learning takes time. Running takes 3 minutes. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds from the initiation of the ground action, the Vorkai Southern Force began to move, not toward our positions, away from them, through the district, toward the northern and eastern edges of the city, toward the landing zones that their shuttles had used in the first days of the occupation. Aaron's teams followed them, not to close the gap, to maintain pressure, to make sure the decision to leave was not reconsidered. On the Unbroken, Owen tracked the Vorkai shuttle launches from the surface. One by one they came up, ascending toward the 3 crippled cruisers in low orbit. He let them dock. He let them load. He watched the repair attempts on the propulsion systems, which were going to take significantly longer than the Vorkai appeared to want them to take. I stood in the ruined southern district with dawn coming up around me, and watched the last Vorkai ground forces leave Kelevara. The city was quiet. Risol stood beside me. He was looking at the same sky. The Vorkai shuttles were gone, climbing toward the crippled cruisers. The bombardment was over. The ground was theirs again, battered, scarred, full of loss that would take years to account for, but theirs. He said, very quietly, "They are leaving." "Yes," I said. He did not say anything else for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, something in it that I could not fully name but recognized, because I had heard it before in other people at moments like this one. It was the sound of someone arriving at the other side of something they had not been sure they would survive. "3 of your people," he said. "Yes. Cole, Nadia, Glenn." He said the names carefully, making sure each one was complete and distinct. He had asked me for their names 4 days ago, on the second night, and he had remembered them exactly. "Yes," I said. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, "We will remember them, not as a formality. We will say their names every year, every ceremony, for as long as our world stands. They are part of what Kelevara is now. They are in the ground here." I looked at the sky. I kept my face still. I said, "Thank you." Aaron was behind me. I could hear him not saying anything, which was its own kind of sound. We stayed like that for a few minutes, the 3 of us, while the dawn came up over the wreckage of a city that was still here. 11 days after Kelevara, 3 Conclave warships appeared in the system. They had accelerated, we later learned, after receiving the automatic transmission logs from the Unbroken's black box, a system that the Conclave had long-range access to, as part of the standard equipment requirements for vessels operating in their regions. They had been receiving our logs the entire time. They had known, with a delay of hours, what was happening on the ground and in orbit. They had accelerated when the logs showed it was already over. The lead ship was the CNS Deliberate Response, which was a name that carried its own editorial commentary on the Conclave's general approach. Its commanding officer, Admiral Selvan, was a species that I had no previous experience with. Tall, bilateral, a deep green that suggested a plant ancestry, and very old in the way that some species were very old in a way humans were not yet. He hailed the Unbroken first. I took the call on the bridge. "Sergeant Voss," he said. His translation was flawless. The Conclave systems were far ahead of ours. "I am formally required to note that your actions in this system were conducted without Conclave authorization, and in violation of several protocols governing unsponsored military activity in member world territories." "I know," I said. I am formally required to note that your crew and vessel are subject to review. I know that too. A pause. Having noted both of those things formally, Selvan said, I would like to note, informally, that we have reviewed the complete operational logs. All of them. I waited. 6 days, he said. 42 personnel. Casualty ratio maintained below 10% of your own force. An opposing force of more than 4,000, reduced to 0 ground presence. 3 cruisers disabled, and currently unable to depart the system, where they will remain until our recovery teams can process them. Another pause. And 900 million Kelavaran lives present and breathing this morning, who would not be if you had continued your cartography mission. I did not say anything. Did it need authorizing? Selvan said. I thought about that. No, I said. I don't think it did. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I suppose it did not. The formal review took 3 weeks and resulted in a document that said, essentially, that what we had done was irregular, but that the outcomes were difficult to argue with. The conclave's language was careful and measured, and full of the kind of phrasing that lets an institution acknowledge a situation without committing to a position on it. I read the whole document once and set it aside. What I tracked instead was what happened after. The news of Kelavara moved through conclave communication networks with the speed that significant news always moves, accelerated by the fact that it was a story that didn't fit comfortably into any existing narrative, which made it impossible to ignore. 200 species, dozens of worlds, the accumulated diplomatic and philosophical infrastructure of 4 centuries. And what had moved first was 42 humans in a ship that smelled like 3 old wars, answering a signal that was not addressed to them. The Vorkai response was the thing I had not predicted and probably should have. Within 3 weeks of their departure from Kelavara, 2 other worlds that the Vorkai had been rating as marginal, low-response targets reported something new. The local populations were fighting back. Not effectively, not with our training or our equipment or our particular institutional history of conflict, but they were fighting back, which they had not done before, and the Vorkai, for the first time in 40 years of raiding, were not staying. Something had changed in the calculation. The Vorkai had encountered a species that came to someone else's defense for no strategic reason, with no authorizing body, at significant cost, and had not stopped until the problem was solved. That did not fit their model of how species behaved. It created a variable they did not know how to account for. If one small ship of humans showed up where nobody expected them to show up, what else might show up, and where, and when? Fear of the unknown is older than any civilization. The Vorkai had spent 40 years operating in a galaxy where the unknown was manageable, because the range of responses was predictable. We had made the range unpredictable. That, it turned out, was worth more than numbers. On Kelavara, reconstruction had begun. Resol sent me a message 3 weeks after we left. A formal message, the kind that took time and consideration to write, not a quick communication. He told me about the memorial that had been established, a small marker in the ruined southern district, near the place where the last Vorkai forces had left. 3 names on it, in both Kelavaran script and Earth Standard characters: Cole Whitman, Nadia Fossey, Glenn Harker. He told me that the inscription beneath the names read, "They came when no one expected anyone to come. They stayed until the work was done." I read that message in my quarters on the Unbroken, 2 days out from Earth, heading home. I sat with it for a while. Then I started the after-action report that I had been putting off because I could not find the right way to begin it. I found the right way while I was sitting there with Resol's message in front of me. The report was required to be addressed to my commanding officer. I wrote the body of it that way. The facts, the timeline, the tactical decisions and their outcomes, the equipment used and the resources expended, and the results achieved. Standard format, accurate and complete. But the last paragraph I wrote for 3 other people. I told Cole, and Nadia, and Glenn what they had been part of. Not the numbers. They would not have cared about the numbers, because soldiers who are good at the work rarely care about the aggregate version of what they did. I told them the specific parts. I told Cole that the pressure system activation he had helped set up on the 2nd night had worked exactly as planned. I told Nadia that the route she had mapped through the eastern subsurface was still on the schematic, and had been used 7 times total. I told Glenn that Resol had used his name at the ceremony and had not mispronounced it. I told them that 900 million people were alive this morning because 42 of us answered a signal and decided to see what we could do. I told them that the Conclave Membership Council had reconvened 6 days ago. The vote had been 9-2 in favor of humanity's application. The 2 who voted against cited unpredictability as their concern. The official record of the majority response contained a sentence that I read 3 times. The unpredictability cited by the dissenting members is precisely the quality that makes humanity a necessary presence in this body. I told them that we were going home. I closed the report and looked out the small viewport of my quarters, at the stars going past, the distance between things that seemed enormous and was not, when you had a ship and a reason, and the willingness to burn hard through the dark. The galaxy had been surprised by us. It would be surprised again. I was not arrogant about it. Arrogance is a story you tell yourself, and I had spent too long doing the actual work to be interested in the story version, but I knew something about what we were and what we were capable of, and I knew it not as pride but as fact, the way you know the specifics of equipment you have used a long time in conditions that tested it. We were going home. In the morning, I would start preparing the debrief. In the evening, I would find Aaron and Danny and Owen and the others, and we would sit together the way people sit together after something real, and we would say the names of the ones who were not with us, and then we would talk about other things. Someone, somewhere, was always going to need what we were able to give. The signal would come again, from some direction we had not thought to look, in some form we might not immediately recognize. We would hear it. We always heard it. And we would go.